Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Noel Douglas, who is the first speaker in the first ever inaugural, hopefully annual Left Design Festival 2021. So Noel is an artist, designer, writer, musician. He's been involved in sort of the anti-capitalist movement for a couple of decades now. I remember sort of being a teenager during the Iraq War, so during some of my first kind of political awakenings, and seeing the War on Terror playing cards, which I recently found out was Noel. So it's really heartwarming to be able to welcome him here and get that nice little sort of like look back to my childhood. So most recently worked with sort of social movements, Brandalism, and he's done some work with the Grenfell Next of Kin. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Noel, who'll be hosting our first session titled Jamming Their Culture and Creating Our Own.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So I'm just okay to share the screen, am I?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as sort of housekeeping, the Q&A function is open. You'll see it down in the bottom of your screen. So feel free to tap any questions in there as they come up when you're thinking, and we'll get to those sort of after Noel's presentation here. And please put in the box whether you'd like to speak or whether you'd like me to sort of relay the question for you. It'd be nice to be able to introduce a couple of people if you'd like to go on audio at some point. So yeah, Noel.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the invite. It's very good to be able to talk at something like this. We need more of these things, I think, really. My talk is really on the theme of, I suppose, kind of how do we scale up what we do so that we can kind of win. And it's kind of a mixture of a bit of analysis that I find useful and then practical projects, some of mine and some of other people's, that I think express some of the theoretical ideas that I'm going to give you, which will hopefully clarify kind of what I'm showing you. So just to start off with a quote from Nicholas Mirzov's How to See the World, which I thought was interesting. He said in 2012, 1/3 of the world's population had internet access, up 566% since 2000. 2014, an estimated 3 billion people were online. By the end of the decade, Google envisages 5 billion people on the net. 100 hours of YouTube video uploaded every minute. 6 billion hours of video watched every month on the site. 1 hour for every person on Earth. In 1930, there were 1 billion photographs taken every year. By 2012, there were 380 billion a year, nearly all digital. By 2014, 1 trillion a year, 25% increase on 2012, obviously because of the increasing use of smartphones. 2011, 1 trillion visits to YouTube. This is not just another form of mass media, Nicholas argues. Sorry. It's the first universal medium. The emerging society is visual. So I think that's really the key thing and why I've pulled that quote out as a start. And because we're all, I think, people interested in the visual here. So we do know that images can have an impact. I would argue this is one of the, despite the stream of images that we're engaging with and despite the amount, I would argue this is one of the last images that really had a big impact. Alan Kurdi, the poor refugee child washed up on the beach. When you look at kind of, that can be measurable when you look at the ways it affected things like searches for terms like refugees or the use of refugees over the arguments around migrants. So one of the things I'm interested in is how we can use signs and means in class struggle. And one of the people I use as a kind of theoretical basis for this is a guy called Velishnov, who was a Russian revolutionary who worked in the Bakhtin school with Mikhail Bakhtin after the Russian Revolution, obviously in a time when words and saying and what you said mattered. And so he argued in a book called Marxism and the Philosophy of Language that the social multi-accentuality of the ideological sign is a very crucial aspect. It's thanks to these intersecting of accents that a sign maintains its vitality and dynamism and a capacity for further development. A sign that is withdrawn from the pressures of the social struggle inevitably loses force, degenerating into allegory. Yet the very same process also makes it the sign a refracting and distorting medium. The ruling class strives to naturalize the sign, to extinguish or drive in with the struggle, to make the sign uni-accentual. In fact, each ideological sign has two faces, like Janus. Any current curse word can become a word of praise. Any current truth must inevitably sound to other people as the greatest lie. This inner dialectical quality of the sign comes out fully in the open only in times of social crisis and revolutionary changes. And so what Vilshnov is saying there is that there's always a struggle over the meaning of things, and that the ruling class are always striving to contain those meanings and in a sense drive them inwards to make them unique, central, to act as if they were sort of natural in a sense, and they're not socially constructed. And we're always trying to break them apart. And this is a good example of this. This is a Greenpeace competition to debrand the BP logo after the Gulf of Mexico disaster, called Behind the Logo. And you see there the very intelligent use that people put to the BP logo, which of course the BP logo is the biggest lie in graphic design. It was done by Lander Associates to make out that BP, make them almost look like Friends of the Earth, this sort of green sunflower. Another example for the mass media of trying to make something unique, central, or turn it inwards, they're trying to control things from the ruling class. This is the front pages from the student revolts in 2010. And you can see that on every paper, regardless of what the supposed politics of that paper, you see the same photograph. You know, a great photograph. It's one by my friend Mark. It's very dynamic, but obviously they chose that picture for a reason. And I would suggest that reason is about turning all the reasons for that demonstration, which we had, which was to defend free education, defend education itself, defend the idea that we need spaces free of going into debt to learn, gets turned into students are violent, a protest is violent, even if you're middle class, protest is violent, like you see there on the Daily Mail. Do not go protest, do not try and change anything. You know, it's kind of wrong, essentially. Other examples from the environment that I've seen that I think are doing this as well. We have the ongoing commodification of previous rebellious forms. So you have McDonald's doing a Jamie Reed style, get your garlic mayo wrap of the day. Or in advertising, you see this thing where they'll often promote revolution, but it's always got to be just the revolution of you and not anything more than that. And I'm kind of intrigued by that. I do a site called Ad Revolt, which is collecting all the times advertising mentions revolution or uses it to sell, which it still does lots. And I think that's interesting as well, because that suggests there's a kind of fear of the actual revolution behind the use of the revolution to sell products. But then when you look at the spaces that we create, when we get together or when there is an eruption of some kind, so this is the Indignados in Spain, in Madrid, our spaces are full, the multi-act central, as Vilshnov said, they are full of voices, they're full of signs, they're full of expression. And that's obviously because they're backed up by real democracy, however limited it might have been, however limited it might have been for a time. You know, this is one of the problems we've got at the moment, is we have these kind of eruptions and they don't necessarily last that long. I mean, obviously recently the kind of wave went into politics with Bernie Sanders and Corbyn, but you know, it's backed up by real democracy. So in the spaces again, full of signs and symbols, full of graphics, full of people trying to speak with each other. And then you've seen this sort of comeback, I think really interesting, of the kind of humble cardboard sign, which again, I think is just another way of people putting their voice out, obviously, on demonstrations. And again, very, very clever use of this. This to me shows that there's an intelligence in the general public, which often is completely denigrated by the politicians, really, and is not, we're not taking that seriously in that sense. And you see this coming through in the signs that people put on the demonstrations. Again, sort of some very clever ones. I mean, this slogan from the Occupy Wall Street, you know, an advertising agency would have been very happy with that if that had been related to maybe some kind of advert or something. Very clever use of the sign and the words. So Mikhail Bakhtin, who worked with Vilshnov, said all language and all thought is dialogical. This means that everything anybody ever says always exists in response to things that have been said before and in anticipation of things that will be said in response. We never, in other words, speak in a vacuum. As a result, all language and the ideas which language contains and communicates is dynamic, relational, engaged in a process of endless redescriptions of the world. And although Mikhail Bakhtin was writing that in the 20s, to me, that's a very good description of the internet and what happens on the internet with signs and communication. Ben Davis, in an article called Ways of Seeing of Instagram, though, kind of warns that if we don't use the new ways in new ways, then we risk just replicating the old ways. So one of the key things he does in this essay is relate John Berger's ways of seeing to current Instagram sort of photographs. And he talks about how the use of Instagram by many people is like kind of old wine, new wine in old bottles. I mean, John Berger argued here that the means of reproduction are used politically and commercially to disguise or deny what their existence makes possible, i.e. that we've come to a point where we do have the potential for a democratic culture, but it's limited by capitalism. And Ben Davis makes the argument that, you know, on Instagram, you see technology has democratized image making. That is, it's put the artistic power of once mainly associated with aristocrats to stylize your image and project yourself to an audience as desirable into everyone's hands. But images retain their function as game pieces in the competition for social status. Doesn't this look delicious? Aren't I fabulous? Look where I am, look what I have. They tend to be this kind of way that people use Instagram. So it's not using the technology for the potential that it has. It's still putting it into kind of essentially capitalist commodified forms. So here he compared the still lifes that John Berger talked about in Ways of Seeing with modern Instagram photography. And John Berger, you know, made the obvious point in a way, but it's an important point that glamour can exist without personal social envy being a common and widespread emotion. The existing social conditions make the individual feel powerless. He lives in the contradiction between what he is and what he would like to be. He then becomes fully conscious of this contradiction and its causes, and so joins the political struggle to get rid of capitalism, essentially, or else he lives continually subject to envy, which, compounded with his sense of powerlessness, dissolves into recurrent daydreams. And I would say, again, a lot of the social media is around that. I mean, there's an art theorist called John Roberts who's just got a new book coming out, which I haven't read, but sounds quite interesting argument, where he's actually arguing that the sort of vanity and the narcissism in a lot of the platforms actually people really love, and actually it's ingratiating them with capitalism even more, which I think is kind of an interesting argument. So culture jamming with memes. So this was set up in 2010. This is a website called mydavidcameron.com that a guy called Clifford Singer set up. And again, this advert, this is the actual Tory advert from the election campaign. This to me is another example of a uniaccentral advert. So it's trying to obviously suggest that the Tories will care about the NHS. Obviously that wasn't true. So Clifford Singer put up a website initially where he just did a few, this is still when memes were sort of coming through, but did a few different ones on the website that people could download. But then he realized actually what was more interesting was to have an online generator which allowed people themselves to do it. So they did a bit of code and they worked it out and sort of essentially create a framework where people could express their reality. To go back to Vlishnov's idea of, you know, to some people it's the truth, to other people it's the greatest lie. So again, you see here the sort of within the general public, there's a very good understanding of class war in a sense, and what the Tories are up to. And some of them, again, sort of very clever. This was around the time of Rupert Murdoch being taken through the courts. Some of them quite harsh, but then of course that is harsh. Lots of people have lost their lives because of the cuts to the NHS. Some of them are a bit crazy. I do like the kind of craziness of the meme language as well. And I think memes are really interesting. I mean, they are in a sense condensed political arguments at their best. Online posters, or kind of an expanded poster that exists on a digital wall. But, you know, the clever use of the image and text, which again would have often been in fine art before, with people maybe like Barbara Kruger or something like that, now comes into the everyday and is shared in the networks, and obviously done by people that aren't necessarily artists and designers. And that's what I find interesting. So I'm collecting memes at the Meme Revolt site, partly also because they're all held in these corporate networks, and I'm worried that they'll all just get lost in the sea of, you know, if say Twitter ever goes down or whatever. So I'm collecting the kind of political memes. So I think they're important forms of expression in the current society that we're in. And it is interesting how, you know, just one shift, and again we know this from montage, can make a massive difference. So this is a meme that the one on the right is the meme, the one on the left is the original photograph of when May went over to meet Trump. But the simple thing of putting the Handmaid's Tale hat on the Theresa May, who's obviously already wearing the red dress, so someone noticed that, obviously, you know, does all sorts of things in terms of suggesting about the, you know, the rise in misogyny, the rise in sexism that's going on in society, Donald Trump's role in that. It also suggests the role of Britain being subservient to America. You know, all these things are kind of within it, in a sense, if we look at it. So it's very clever political use of images. Then another set of theories I draw on are from the Centre for Artistic Activism, and they talk about artistic activism mobilising affect and effect. Now, the Centre for Artistic Activism is Steve Duncombe and Steve Lambert in the States to activists, artists. And they say artistic activism is a dynamic practice combining the creative power of the arts to move us emotionally with the strategic power of activism necessary to bring about social change. Art and activism do different work in the world. Activism, as the name implies, is the activity of challenging and changing power relations. There are many ways of doing activism and being an activist, but the most common element is an activity targeted toward a discernible end. Simply put, the goal of activism is an action to create an effect. Art, on the other hand, tends not to have such clear target. It's hard to say what art is for or against. Its value often lies in providing us with a perspective and a new way to envisage the world. Good art always contains a surplus of meaning, something we can't just describe or put our finger on, but moves us nonetheless. Its goal, if we can use the word, is to stimulate a feeling, move us emotionally, or alter our perception. Art, equally simply stated, is an expression that generates affect. As any seasoned activist can tell you, people don't just decide to change their mind and act accordingly. They're personally moved to do so by emotionally powerful stimuli. We're moved by affective experiences to do physical actions that result in concrete effects. Affect leads to effect. We might think of this as combined in a new word, a-effect. Artistic activism is a practice aimed at generating a-effect, emotionally resonant experiences that lead to measurable shifts in power. And of course, we live in a world of signs and symbols. I mean, I do this when I teach my students. I show them this. That's from Adbusters magazine. You know, everyone can name the logos on the left, but very few can name the plants on the right. So the environment we're working in, despite the fact the environment is actually under threat from it, is the one on the left. And they say our modern political terrain is a highly mediated landscape of signs and symbols, story and spectacle. To operate successfully in this cultural topography, we need to observe, analyze, and respond creatively. We need to be artistic activists. Acknowledging that the political landscape is also a cultural landscape opens up new terrain to work upon. Artistic activism is at home in town squares and shopping malls, on billboards, or through social media, as well as galleries and state houses. Artistic activism as an effective image, performance, or experience is also well suited for an age of smartphone cameras and social networks. People don't share policy papers, they share things that move them. So one of the things we could look at is the hijacking of space, because I think this is a broad category that's a useful one. 20 years ago, Naomi Klein brought out No Logo, which had a big impact on the movement. At the time, the anti-capitalist movement that was developing in Europe and America. Similarly, Adbusters had been kind of mining a kind of subvertising a path for a number of years, and also sort of was definitely a big influence as well. And this was in reaction, of course, to the corporate globalization that essentially turns all of our actual space into this kind of corporate monotony, or where advertising moves away from just being in advertising spaces into like, so here it takes over the whole bus stop, here it takes up the steps. So here, this is a very undemocratic relationship if we think about it in terms of space, because there's no way you can't look at this advert because you have to look at the stairs to go up them. So it's a very dictatorial relationship in public space, which I don't think people often think about. And again, why should advertisers be able to do this? And one of the things that, one of the movements that came out around this time, this is in the early 2000s, was the Stop Pub movement in France. So kind of almost like an anti-graphics at one level. So they would do something, they would do things like protest around billboards. So they would do things like find which billboard, often billboards are illegal, a lot of the big ones you see, they're not always got permission. So they'd find out which billboards are illegal, and you can see here they're doing a protest around one. They had a demand that they linked their direct action campaign to, which is what the 50 by 70 poster is at the bottom, because in France, all political advertising, and if there's someone from France in the audience and I'm saying this wrong, please do correct me, but I believe this is true. All political advertising has to be 50 by 70. So they were calling for all advertising to only ever be 50 by 70 and not illuminated or not in anything else. But they did some amazing direct actions. I think there's groups still going in France doing this. I mean, this is one of the influences on Brandalism, obviously, as well. So this is during the European Social Forum in 2003 in Paris, when 35,000 activists got together during the globalization era. They came down into the Paris metro and just did every single advert. It was created quite an amazing atmosphere, really, where they'd taken it all over. And this is another billboard that's actually illegal that they found out. A similar use of technology and graphics, which I think was really interesting from around this time, was Johannes Gies, who was a media artist. The World Economic Forum would meet in Davos, they still do, every year, partly because it's a very nice place to meet if you don't want any protests to happen. There's one train line in, and it's a small town in the mountains. So what Johannes Gies did here, and again, this is about, to me, about amplifying voices, is he set up a website, and you could write your message to the World Economic Forum. And then, as you can see, that message was then projected by a laser onto the mountains, onto the snow above Davos, so everyone could see the message that you were sending. So a really nice, beautiful sort of reversal, where the World Economic Forum, most powerful people in the world, all hiding away in this summit, talking for all of the rest of us. And then we are sort of, through Johannes' system, talking back at them at a sort of a large scale. So one of the final ideas I want to put forward as well, or another idea, is from Stephen Duncombe again. He talks about the need to build ethical spectacles. He contrasts these with capitalist spectacles, so concerts or commercial spectacles of some kind. He says the goal of the ethical spectacle is not to replace the real with the spectacle, which is what the situationists and people like that in the 60s would have criticized the spectacle as, but to reveal and amplify the real through spectacle. So it's about us using spectacle to really reveal what's happening and going on in the world, and through that, bring more people into the movement. So one of the things that I think is really interesting in that is to think about the demonstration space as a place to do this. So I thought this was a very powerful front of the demonstration. This is the eyes of Eric Garner from a Black Lives Matter protest in America. David Gentleman, Kevin mentioned Stop the War. Well, David Gentleman's done most of the placards for Stop the War movement in Britain. This was the one he devised for the February 15th demonstration, the biggest one around the world. And the idea was it would just say no, and it'd have this placard. So he kind of envisaged the whole demonstration saying no. Now this isn't a very good quality slide, I apologize, but it nearly worked. You can sort of see there that kind of the no kind of comes through. And what I love about this in a way is, especially working with David, he's about 90 now, is that many of you will know David is a watercolor illustrative artist really for most of his work. So he has this very interesting dual side, where on the one hand he's doing that, and then on the other hand he does very militant anti-imperialist work. Ne Peuplier are another group I'd say kind of done really interesting things within the demonstration space. So this is them working. These are the people that came out of Atelier Populaire in '68 and Grappus in France. Again, another very famous political graphics group aligned with the Communist Party there. This was for a demonstration of the unemployed. And then these demonstrations would often have kind of educational boards that would kind of be opened up at the end of the demonstration or whatever, so that people could read about the issues. And then one from here, this is the G20. So just before occupying this country, about 2009, Climate Camp in the City occupied this part of Broadgate, just outside Liverpool Street Station, because the buildings in the back do carbon trading, which obviously at the time, not many people knew about. Even then, sort of the environment was still kind of a bit of a battle to get on the news agenda. So we occupied that, and I would put up these are my posters we put up on the banks, on the walls with the slogan tape, create galleries within the demonstration. So the idea here would be that, especially for the bankers or people that are on their lunch, they come walk past, and it would be a way to engage them in some kind of conversation about what we're doing, make it more friendly as well. Then, as I say, then Occupy happened here. So let's talk a little bit about Occupy design that we set up off the back of that. So we had inspired by the Arab Spring and New York and Occupy Wall Street. We tried to occupy London Stock Exchange. Nearly all of the land around St. Paul's is private. The land outside London Stock Exchange is completely private. So the only bit of public land that we actually could settle on was this bit down the side of the St. Paul's, because historically it had been a route where people traded, and that's why it was still public. So that's why the camp stayed there. And so we obviously decided that we needed to do something. This is more pictures from the walls of Occupy there. You can see the Tahrir Square picture, which I don't know who did that, but a very beautiful piece of solidarity with the Egyptian revolt at the time. So we thought we got to do something, we got to get together. So we formed Occupy Design. Initially, this came off the back that in the camp, some of the designers involved in Occupy Design had already started on the Occupied Times, inspired by the Occupied Wall Street Journal in Occupy Wall Street, but also inspired by spoof newspapers from further back. So some of the people working in the group have been involved in Reclaim the Streets about the decade before. And these were the papers that, for instance, were used for the Financial Crimes, was used for the protests against the IMF and World Bank in 2000. and the other papers were all used for May Day protests in Britain. So the Financial Crimes, as an example, was impounded by the police when it was released, but of course all the newspapers, just like these ones as well, by the Yes Men and Steve Lambert and the Anti-Advertising Agency in New York, which is another example, all put our kind of politics across by taking on the clothes of the corporate papers and then pretending to be them in some way. So this hijacking of their look. Occupy Times went on to become a magazine and went on for a couple of years. We'd use lots of illustration and commission people. The back would always be a poster that people could use. Some of the people in Occupy Design were from Greece, kind of refugees from the Greek crisis. So this is some work from Georgios, who was here in London, who's in Greece at the moment. This was a poster for Aaron Swartz, when Aaron Swartz killed himself. It says, sharing isn't immoral, it's a moral imperative. Aaron Swartz killed himself, of course, because he was being accused of sharing government library files or library files. To me, these are all about trying to search for the kind of modern protest aesthetic as well. So we did a logo for Occupy London that was done by Jonathan Barnbrook, who was part of the group. We did a whole project called Debrand the City, because quite shockingly in that year, D&AD, which is a group, that Design and Art Direction, which works with students and industry, set a brief for students to rebrand the financial district of London after the crash. Kind of, yes, unbelievable, really. We're seeing the students were the first victims of it with the 9K fees. So we have kind of various entries where people tried to debrand the city in kind of interesting ways. We did other things. So I said we had Greek designers in the group. So when the Greek crisis was at its height, we did projections onto the German embassy. We worked with students, again, other victims of austerity, really. That was the kind of remit. So students, obviously it's student debt, and also because it's London, the price of property. So these were sort of posters that they developed with us to sort of talk about their experience. And again, I think this is a really useful thing to get people to work visually and to think about how they can talk about what they're going through and use images that then kind of relate to lots of other people as well. So here's some more of that. Then because the Greek link, we went out to Greece and worked with people that work with the refugee groups. So some friends of mine who also work in a group called Propagate came along, and we did a screen printing workshop. And the idea was to make as many of these tote bags that then people could sell to raise funds to help the refugees, as well as having an interesting design that kind of referenced the refugee crisis in some sort of way and built solidarity. We'd also worked with groups like UK Uncut. I don't know if people remember this group from about 10 years ago, doing lots of really interesting things where they were protesting the cuts by occupying the people that are responsible, so the banks. So they turned the banks into an NHS hospital. Or here, the Starbucks was being turned into a refuge for women, because that was one of the other cuts that were going on. And here, what we do is we'd help with the graphics, because often with these actions that inside, people would be having a good time, but there'd be lots of cops outside, and you wouldn't know necessarily what was going on, and people maybe get a bit worried, people just looking because of the cops. So we make sure that there's kind of posters and stuff that make it very clear what is going on. And then another reason for doing that is that then when people do the Google image search, hopefully, especially around the time, they get the kind of messages in the Google image search, or if you search for Starbucks, we begin to hijack their image stream on Google, a bit like you can see here. Some other groups work with Liberate Tate. Again, an amazing campaign. I was involved in some of the performances. I did the website for them. Certainly one of the best things I think I've ever been involved in, really fantastic. Designed to get BP sponsorship out of the Tate, artist collective, open in the sense that people could join to do the performances and not necessarily do anything else if they didn't want to. Organised through flash mobs. The first one was this solo performance of this guy getting naked and being poured with oil called Human Cost. All the performances were seen as pieces of art. So they all, after they were done in the Tate, the Tate was given a sort of a piece about what the piece was about. This was called The Reveal, which I made some Bank of Tate money because we did a Freedom of Information request and found out that for BP sponsorship, all BP paid to Tate was 220 grand a year, which is nothing really. So we made that amount of money, and that was chucked out in the Tate Britain in that kind of performance. There was lots of other amazing performances. This one was called The Gift, where a windsail was brought from Wales and left as a gift, because in Britain you can gift a piece of art to a museum, and that means they have to discuss whether they want to take it or not. Of course, Tate didn't take this. And then if there's people in America, you probably know this guy online at the moment with us. Reverend Billy came over from America. He pretends to be a preacher, and he exorcised BP, or more accurately, the BP logo, which I suppose is what matters, from the Tate in a performance. And then after 5 years of doing that, we did actually end the BP sponsorship in the Tate. Now, of course, Tate said that we didn't have any impact on their decision, but I think that's highly unlikely. And just a little bit more on the institutional thing, because it's quite difficult because this stuff has become fashionable to some extent. You have to be kind of careful. So the Design Museum did a show called Hope to Note 3 years ago. We found out, or someone found out that they'd hosted arms dealers in the lobby whilst the show was on. Some of the people in the show were from places like Syria, where the bombs of the Italian arms manufacturer Leonardo, who they hosted, had been used. So we obviously thought this was outrageous and not good enough, really. And a bit like the Tate, you know, I think there's a job to push all institutions. I know it's been happening in America as well, to be more ethical. So we said to the Design Museum that we want to remove our work from the show, because it's the only thing we had over them, really, because there was 2 weeks of the show left to go. So we went and did that. And then it was kind of interesting that the Design Museum, we asked the Design Museum to put up in the show where all the gaps were, that they would taken the work out, because we didn't want arms dealers to meet in the Design Museum. Of course, to the Design Museum, the arms dealers became the defense manufacturers. This is the letter they put up on here on the website about us. And it's kind of interesting because it tries to play that their freedom of speech is being undermined by our protest, which obviously has links to things that are going on at the moment. So it's just things like here, the museum is now being targeted by a group of activists. Not all of them are being accurate in their presentation of the situation. What they do is, no, they weren't being targeted by a group of activists, they've been targeted by activists actually in the show. They had a show of activists, and that's the problem when you have a show of activists, you can't kind of act like that. Now, it's very interesting to note for Labour people that Peter Mandelson is the director of the Design Museum. Grenfell Next of Kin, I've just been working with them over the summer. So this is a group that are not against the main Grenfell campaign, they're part of that too. They just want to have a bit of space to do their own stuff. They're about half the people who lost stuff in the tower. Lost people, sorry, not stuff, that's what they said. Yes, lost babies, lost relatives, lost friends, really, really awful stuff. So one of the things we did on the fourth anniversary this summer, we thought we've got to know there's been no prosecutions, the inquiry's going on. So we went down to Kensington and Chelsea Council and projected these slogans onto the council building, obviously again to get them out in the media as well. I designed a poster that was an augmented reality poster, because one of the things they wanted to do was get the stuff from the inquiry out as much as possible. So when you put your phone over these posters, you would get different clips from the inquiry. I started working with them, making these clips from the inquiry. What they wanted was the background dropped out and the tower put in behind as all these people said their awful things. So this guy is the head of the cladding company, and he basically just says he wasn't bothered, sort of, really, in French. So we put the tower behind to show the effects of what they said. And it really is outrageous. I mean, if you watch the inquiry, all the Tory council leaders all just sort of say, all had no training in the jobs they were doing, and all just kind of like go, really, when they get asked why, you know. So here's an example. This is on Portobello Road.
The works at Grenfell Tower I felt were being taken care of elsewhere.
Crucial fire safety information was never passed on to the tower's managers.
Perhaps I should have done that.
Yeah, so that's the leader of the council saying that, you know. So I mean, obviously we're trying to help them as much as possible so that they can try and get justice, really. Again, because that tower burning brings together so much of what's been going wrong in the politics in neoliberalism, you know, in the world over the last 20 years, the deregulation, the lack of concern for social housing and for poorer people, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Brandalism, yep. So if you go on the Brandalism website, if you haven't already, you can download, you can order. I still think you can order, or you can get information on the Allen keys that you need to open up bus stops. Obviously, the campaign is designed to encourage people to do that. Yes, it is technically illegal. No, it's not a massive thing. None of us, I think, so nobody that's been involved in I can't say who obviously does put the posts in the bus stops, but no one has been caught yet. So during the COP summit in Paris in 2015, there was a big coordinated action, and I think this is what we need more of, this sort of stuff. So we coordinated, we got 600 sites done, 80 different artists, and this was all done on the morning as the COP summit started. So you've got the stuff in the streets, you can download the posts on the website, because we had various Parisians asking us if we could do that. And of course, it's also then about hijacking the media frame to get our message into the media frame on something like the morning of the summit, which again is reasonably successful in doing that. The one you see here is by Barnbrook Design. It's about the way that Vauxhall got found out lying about the diesel emissions on their cars. And that was to protest the corporate nature of the COP, which I'm sure is going to be very similar in Glasgow, and the contradiction that has with fighting the environment. Some more recent ones with Brandalism. There was a whole thing about toxic air. This was last year. So I did this one, no breathing space. And then just now, the stuff that's going up at the moment, which is linked with ad-free cities, which is a campaign to, as the name suggests, get rid of ads in cities. But also this is one to ban fossil ads. So these are going up at the moment. I've done this Shell one, and I've done this Total one. And there again, there's a whole other bunch of artists that have done stuff for that too. And again, if we have more people able to do this, we could have more effect. I mean, I think that's the thing that I suppose one of the big sort of questions we need to ask ourselves in terms of, you know, how can we scale up what we do? Some other good examples I think that aren't mine that you know, have worked well. Extinction Rebellion's sort of design framework that was come up by It's Only Rock and Roll Studio, I think has been very successful. Interesting as well, because it kind of takes away from sort of very traditional protest graphics. It does allow for people to kind of do their own thing within it, as well as kind of trying to keep a sort of a recognizable identity, which I think is also an issue in our movements. You know, how you don't want things to be too corporate, but at the same time, you can't have everything being completely crazy and different from each other for things to be coherent. So I think they've walked that balance really well. The extinction symbol itself, done by artist ESP, which he won't allow to be used commercially. I think that's a really good stand that he's made, and that also obviously allows that, sort of also suggests that, you know, these things are beyond commercialism, that they kind of matter in a way. And that to me goes back to, I mean, this is Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, you know, the whole idea of commons and how we can build up, how can we build up our own resources, and how can we build up new ways of using the internet that do go against the kind of commodified capitalist kind of way. Because obviously, because I think having been around since the web started, it's certainly true that advertising and all the things that advertising needs to work on the web has spoiled the web to a large degree. You know, it's stopped it functioning in the way that it should do. And then I just finished with a question, really. Some of the questions I've already brought up, like how do we scale what we do? How do we work together, even if we have slightly different, even if we're in slightly different organizations, but I'm sure we share lots and lots of the same ideas. How do we scale up? You know, 15 years ago in the anti-capitalist movement, it was a bit of a weird movement in that it was very big internationally, but not necessarily so big nationally. And then that kind of flipped into everything being about, say, Bernie Sanders and Corbyn, so everything being about nationally in a weird way. So this is the World Social Forum in 2004, you know, 50, 60, 150,000 people coming together to discuss alternatives to globalization. Somehow we've got to recover this. And the reason why we've got to recover it, and this is what I'll finish on, is because the right are moving and the right aren't stupid. And one of the things the right are very good at is staying in power. And they will do anything to stay in power. And unlike us, they're a bunch of bastards. I mean, absolute bastards. They would kill their grandmothers, I would say, to stay in power. And one example of this is this is not the worst tactics, of course, but it's from here. I think these are, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've got someone from New Zealand here. These are two guys from New Zealand that were employed by the Tories to start working on their social media. And they put this out, for instance, and of course, everyone ran to go, oh, how stupid, you've done it in Comic Sans, you look stupid and whatever. But that was exactly the point, because basically by people sharing that and saying it's stupid, it gets more into people's platforms, the algorithm picks it up, more and more people see this message. So if to you, the message is the truth and you get to see it more, then obviously that it begins to influence people more. And then, you know, and it's not just things like this. This is I say this isn't the nastiest stuff. I think the nastiest stuff is more in America, I think, at the moment, and maybe in certain parts of Europe. But I mean, you know, they will do things like this. Which is the Boris chill wave to Brexit train.
Is the chance really to move this thing over the line. Parliament refused finally to give approval for us to come out on October 31st, which was a great disappointment. We've got to get Brexit done.
And that's completely mad, and we've got to stop it. We've got to win. So we've got to work out how we work together and how we scale. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much to Noel. That was fantastic, absolutely beaming ear to ear watching it back there. You know, some nice throwbacks to sort of like the fallen days of my youth as a teenage protester there. And I didn't realize how much, you know, how many touch points I've had with your art before. So that was very charming to watch. So we've got a few questions lined up. I'll just read them out sort of in the order in which they've come in. I don't know if whether they would like to ask them in person, if we want to come on in audio. The first one was from Ian Clotworthy. We can just enable yours quickly now if you do want to come on. Oh, Ian has left. Okay, so Ian says, great project. I just joined the session. Does your collection so far only include English language memes or also other languages?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I just maybe should have said at the start, particularly because we might have a pretty international audience, is that obviously the stuff I'm showing is very English orientated, or maybe American, Europe to some extent. I've got other stuff. With the memes, it's hard for me. I do try and look for stuff that isn't in our area, but of course it's hard, isn't it? So because it doesn't come up in kind of our social channels. So at the moment with the meme revolt, it's very much orientated around British and American politics, I would say. But I mean, I love South American work. I mean, I've got lots of books and I've got friends that work in South America. Pedro, who's the art director of our Busters, fantastic designer, does amazing work. Pedro Nu. Yeah, and I really love South America. South American and Polish is my favorite graphics. But yeah, I'm very aware. But I mean, it's obviously the limits of time as well. I mean, the one thing about doing a meme, trying to collect memes, is obviously because there are so many. It's actually I'm trying to find a way to automate posting. So that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. But anyway, I still think it's important because otherwise they get lost.
That's entirely fair. I just saw there's a quick question from William in the chat there, who asked if there are any sort of London or England-based design collectives or groups to share design resource ideas. There's one, Labour Party Graphic Designers, we've organised today. You can check out labourdesign.co.uk. I'd also recommend checking out the Autonomous Design Group. They've been churning out some absolutely excellent stuff, sort of over the last couple of years. But it's an exciting time for, I think, design on the left at the moment. The next question was from David Lim. I don't know, David, if we can enable your audio. Nothing. Okay, in which case I am now David Lim. So when debranding, e.g. changing the Shell logo, are there any issues with the law in terms of ownership of the original design?
Yeah, of course there are. But I think but the thing is, bring it on. I mean, that's what, you know, I mean, that's what I say. I mean, I got a friend, Darren Cullen, who I also recommend to people, who does a thing called Spelling Mistakes Cost Lives, is his website. He draws stuff. So I think that's one way he gets around. But he's just bought a bus, which is going to be going, I think, up to COP Summit, and it's been painted in Shell colours with his own customized Shell logo, which actually says hell. And he's going to be, you know, essentially, you know, de-branding Shell with this bus. Have a look at it online. It's really great. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think that if they come, I mean, it's with Brandalism, if they come for us, then we make it into more media. You know what I mean? I mean, the thing is, we're on the right side. I mean, I don't. You know, it's about, like, if they want to make, I mean, there's so many instances in history where people have tried to take artists or designers to court for things that, you know, that they nearly always get shown up because, you know, what are they going to get out of it? You know, nothing but bad publicity, really.
Yeah.
I mean, with the Brandalism thing, I mean, if people are interested in doing it, I mean, I do recommend doing it. It's not hard, and one thing you just get the yellow vest on, and honestly, yellow vest is like having an invisible cloak on. It's like you can do so much in a yellow vest, and no one will question you, particularly in big cities. But I understand some people it may be a bit too much, but it's a great thing to do. You know, it's about our public space, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a worthwhile time to ask to mention that sort of the ad busting kits are quite freely available. It's just normally sort of Allen keys or something like that, right?
Yeah, just Allen keys you get from the shops, but it's all on the Brandalism website. Also, I've seen someone in the chats put the French Forme de Lutte. That's also a really good group that Sebastian Marchel does in France. There's a group on Facebook actually for that as well. So I'm just looking at some, yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So the next question from Gabriel Martinez. Have you got Gabriel? I might have to be Gabriel. How does a political designer find one's target audience?
Well, I think that's a mixture, isn't it? So that's interesting. So say with the Grenfell, that happened because I followed them on Twitter and they got in touch with me. And actually, as it was, I was thinking, I need to do something because I live locally, or reasonably local to Grenfell. And I thought it just needed something, you know. So I was already thinking about it. So that was fortuitous. And that gave me a chance with that. I think it just depends on where you are. I mean, it could be that it's a political group that you're in. I've done stuff with political parties before. It could be I've done things with NGOs. It could be your local community. You know what I mean? We need some way to, or where you work. I don't know. It might be about making decent posters when you have a strike, if you're on a union at work or whatever. I mean, I think just generally things need to be visually stronger, you know, like in general. So I think there's lots of avenues that you can follow alongside, you know, just working alongside things yourself. But there's certainly, I think, lots of things, campaigns and things that you can be part of. It depends what you're into and what you think needs to be prioritized.
That's a fun. A really quick one from Lucy Baines. She just asked, you mentioned a book by John Roberts, but she didn't catch the title.
Yeah, let me just try and see if I can find the title. I don't know.
That's fair. While Noel's finding the title, I might take this as a chance to just do a little bit of a plug for Low Point Graphic Designers. Every sort of quarter, we do open submissions for different poster packs based on various themes. We've done everything from sort of like climate emergency, Black Lives Matter, supporting key workers, joining a union. We'll be going live. Our next art pack, which is on NHS Not for Sale, will be going live in the next couple of days. And then the brief will be going live for the next art pack, which is the 4-day week. So if you're interested in sort of creating sort of some of your own original posters to sort of contribute to the vibrancy of the movement, then that'll be going live on Labour Design in a couple of days.
Cool. So the book's called Capitalism and the Limits of Desire by John Roberts.
There we go.
One thing I'd also say in terms of what you can do is that I know lots of stuff has moved onto the internet, but I do think there is a real lack of fly posting kind of generally everywhere. And I think that shouldn't be underestimated, because I think because people pass that all the time, and it used to be far more common for the left to do that, obviously. You can't underestimate how that resonates with people. So, you know, it's not about talking to the converted, it's about affirming people's feelings. And if you say in your area you did a whole load of fly posting against cuts or something, that does say, if someone sees that, they know there's someone else that, you know, is angry or whatever it might be, and it does build people's confidence. You know, I do think that there's more, and it just helps to create a kind of consciousness, really, to go back to the, you know, what we need to do. You know, I mean, that's in the same way that big movements do. I mean, Kevin talked about Stop the War. I mean, I think one of the things that Stop the War did, it didn't stop the wars immediately, but it created a consciousness that was against the war in the country, which is still really there, you know, and and you see in the dislike of people like Tony Blair and stuff, but you know, really is like, so doing stuff on the street is undervalued, and it's not hard.
Yeah, that's fair. I think we're going to try and do a mic again. I think Sean Jordan, if you're on here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Finally got a human being. Yeah, I was just wondering how you might suggest that someone can incorporate their values, incorporate their activism, whilst at the same time, you know, make ends meet for themselves day to day, get by, so that they don't sort of flush their values down the toilet just to make ends meet. And what you might suggest.
I think it's very hard, isn't it? I mean, the one thing about, especially like this phase of capitalism we're in now, and it's even harder, you know, like than it was, I would say, than when I came out of college. You know, things are so precarious for people and whatever. So I think that you can look at it in a number of ways. You could say, you can try and get a job that, you know, doesn't undermine your values too much. So whether that's working in a sort of a design studio, like my friend Jonathan Barnbrook, you know, his design studios are a great design studio. They obviously have a kind of politics that they have, as well as doing kind of interesting commercial work, like for music or whatever. It could be that you work for something like an NGO or anything like something like that. Or it could just be that you just go, I'll do be a designer. And if I can't get the, you know, if I just have to do horrible design, I just have to do some of it, you know, just have to do my stuff alongside of it. You know, I think it's not, I mean, the reason why I call myself an artist and designer is I feel like I would do my stuff, well, I do my stuff without anybody having to say it, or a client or anything like that, you know. And I think you just have to try and work out what you can handle. I mean, obviously my thing is doing teaching with freelance design, but even the teaching has become more and more, not shut down completely, but it's more difficult to operate in the teaching space than it used to be, you know, because of the marketing getting out of control and all those sorts of things, you know. So it's not an easy answer, and I don't think it is, but I also think you shouldn't feel bad if if you're committed to doing good work and you have to do, even if you just have to do a crap job to facilitate it, don't feel bad. You know, that's just life under capitalism, isn't it? I've done plenty of crap jobs whilst I'm doing, you know, this stuff, you know. I mean, I'm lucky now to be able to teach, I know that, but like, you know, just try and get the best situation you can. I think the key thing is time, isn't it? The key thing is not so much money. I mean, again, that's easy to say when things are super expensive, but you know, it is the time. So if you can, so whatever that is, whether that's something in your living arrangements that allows you to kind of get that worked out, or it's about where you live, or you know, are there other things that you can do that maybe reduce the amount of money you need and free you up in that way? You know, I don't know. It's a difficult one, but like I said, I don't feel that you should feel bad if you just have to do crap stuff to keep yourself going for a bit or whatever. That's just like everyone else, isn't it? You know, but it's not easy. So yeah, I don't know, that would be my answer. It's a mixture.
So we had scheduled in sort of a 10-minute break before the next session, but the questions are great. So maybe we just kind of keep running up to the hour. We'll try and, you know, wrap these last few questions here up super quickly. Samantha Fox, are you?
Hi, Noel.
Hi, Sam, right?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Great presentation. I just wanted a quick question. How do people get involved with groups working in this area? Do they just go up and approach them, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I'd say, if you've got, you know, if you want to work with someone, then just get in touch with them. I mean, it's far easier these days than it used to be, you know what I mean? But I think that's, you know, if you feel that what you do aligns with someone, then hopefully they're going to feel that too, and you might be able to work something out, you know. I mean, I'd say there's no shortage of groups, you know, if you're interested in design for people or with people, there's certainly no shortage of groups that could do that help, I think. It's a question of you thinking about what matters and what, you know, who you can help and what's being realistic about what you can do with them or for them. But yeah, just approach people.
And I think the last question we'll take, and then we'll take it just a couple of minutes before the next session kicks off. Tom Jennings, you there?
Hello.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, no, fantastic session. I just wondered whether you've seen any examples of activism or awareness campaigns done by virtual reality yet. I think particularly through COVID, you know, there was use of live shows, there was a couple of series telling the stories of the Black Lives Matter movement. I just wondered whether there are any other examples or whether that's a space that we can start to
Yeah, no, I've not heard of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I imagine so. I mean, I think there's so many spaces. I mean, there was, I think it's a thing in a Jacobean magazine this month about the Italian comics in the 30s, communist comics that they made for kids, you know, to wean them off of fascism, you know. I mean, I just think there's so many things that we could all be doing if we thought about it. And that's the thing about how we can, you know, how can we scale these things up so you could do that? I mean, that also then could come back to money as well. I mean, is it possible, could we get the unions to fund things? You know what I mean? Why is not someone like Unite funding a bunch of people to make memes like these Russian hackers do that are putting out all the troll stuff? You know, I mean, these are the sort of things I think, why is this not happening? It's kind of, you know, and that might include things like VR or whatever it might be. I mean, whatever people are using, whatever the mediums they're using, it feels to me that we've got to be in there, you know, and there's just not a lot of that stuff going on. But no, with VR, I haven't heard anything specific. I think VR is a bit of a weird space, isn't it? I think that augmented reality that I was showing you with the Grenfell thing is a bit, to me, is a bit more interesting, because you don't go into the world, you know, like with your headset, you're in the world and it puts a layer over it on your phone, which I think has a lot of potential. But it's certainly possible, yeah.
Fantastic. And on that, I think we'll wrap the session. If you've still got any questions for Noel, I thoroughly recommend tweeting him at Signs of Revolt, or, you know, just send them over to the LPGD. We're happy to relay anything. We'll take a couple of minutes just to become a break. If you need to hit the bathroom, grab a glass of water or anything like that, you might just have time to boil the kettle. We'll be back at 5:15, and we'll be kicking off Todd Atticus's showcase on the branding from New Zealand Labour's barnstorming 2020 election.
Thanks, everybody. That's great.
Thank you, Noel.